Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be picking up where we left off in our previous video, all about the Piper Warrior. I'll be telling you some of the adventures I've had with it, as well as, kind of how to operate this thing, and specifically in our flight sim format. Let's go ahead and get started. So in the last video, we took a look at everything about getting this thing in the air. Today we're going to be taking a look at the cruise phase of this aircraft. So right now our aircraft is steady. We've got a nice climb, about 79 knots is our VY. We're doing great here. We can see we're getting about 800 feet per minute, which that makes sense. We're not very heavy. The other thing, of course, we're at full power here. We have the fuel pump still running happily here, and we're getting very close to the cruise altitude that I want to be doing, which is about 5,500 feet. Now, this aircraft, when it came to navigation for me, when I was first learning, kind of my experience, again, this is the first plane I ever flew cross-country on my own with, which is always kind of fun. One of the things, of course, that I experienced during all that is the fact that when you look out the window, you're like, this isn't bad. There's a wing in my way. It's just kind of one of those silly things that when you're first doing visual navigation, it sort of surprises you. So now this aircraft originally designed, it did not have one. I'm talking about Just Flight, by the way. When they originally made this one, they did not give you this button, but they did give us this button to make our lives a little easier, which is great for me because it allows me to kind of walk you through that part of our flight once we kind of get to it. 5,500, click. And we did click that button, right? Fine, whatever. I'll do it myself. Don't care. Now, the first thing you learn with this airplane is because it is an all-moving tail, when you go to do any sort of operations with this plane, it requires a surprising amount of effort to put it where you want it to put. And it's kind of the way that they do the phasing with Just Flight controls. Man, that trim is way too sensitive. Go ahead and level ourselves off. Like I always like to go a little bit above my cruise altitude and sort of drop down onto it. Makes it a lot easier. Cruise power for this thing is very, very similar to folks who fly the Archers around. Usually it's like 2540, 2550 RPM. And a lot of them, of course, so we'll just kind of let the nose come down. 2500 is plenty. And we're just going to level off at our cruise altitude of 5,500 feet here. And then kind of settle in here and get ready for our navigational phase of our journey here. So right now we're in basically sort of eastern Connecticut. As a matter of fact, Rhode Island is right there off my right. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be navigating to Windham, Connecticut. Now, Windham is a little far away as far as distances goes, but it's not going to be too bad for us because, again, we can find all the lucky highways. Now, the first thing that shocks me, I remember in the early days of flying this plane, was not only how stiff the controls are, but the way that the nose sort of responded to pitch inputs was very, very, very strange. When I sit here and I give this a couple quick little snaps and taps of trim kind of a thing like that, I can feel as the whole entire plane kind of aligns itself. I remember doing the first couple stalls, whereas in a Cessna 172, it's a very abrupt stall. When this aircraft, the Warrior stalls, it's a much more kind of, okay, fine, and then it just stops flying. Usually kind of the tail sort of fails on you, and then like the rest of it sort of fails on you a couple moments later. But what we want to do here is we want to go get everything ready kind of for my cruise phase here. I've got everything about trimmed out where I want it to be. I'm about 20 feet high, but that's pretty typical. So one of the tough things about this one, of course, is setting the mixture. And one of the nice things you have in the real world is that we can hear it. We can't hear this well. Of course, I got myself new headphones. And present to myself, I got myself some nice ones. And it's actually really hard to do this now. You have to turn down the noise cancellation on it because it's too easy to hear. But what we'll do, I'm actually going to flip this thing back on so you can see how much, how little work this thing is to stabilize. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my mixture control, and I'm just going to start pulling it back. And on my left-hand side, I'm monitoring my little handy-dandy exhaust gas temperature gauge. Before I do that, though, and whenever you do enter cruise, go ahead and kill the fuel pump. We just don't need it at this particular point. All right, let's go ahead and pull it a little bit lean. And just going to let it sit there for a second. One of the things that they simulate fairly well with this Just Flight aircraft is the whole idea of the aircraft not responding instantly. And that's very true with anything engine related. So go ahead and pull it out just a tiny bit more. We're just going to monitor the exhaust gas temperature, and you can see that it came down just a little bit. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit so y'all can see. Now, if I enrichen it, and you can just watch what the exhaust gas temperature wants to do. Give it a little more rich. Do you see how it's starting to drop? So we'll go ahead and go the other way and see kind of where it wants to settle. Now, this is actually a very authentic experience because this is exactly how picky these things really are. They're never quick. They're never smooth. And if I pull it back just a little bit, see how the exhaust gas temperature spikes significantly there? That means we're starting to get close. Pull back. Whoa, look at it go. Look at it go. See how fast it climbs? Again, if you're not sure what I'm looking right over here. Go ahead and pull it back a little bit. Oh, too much. And all we're doing is we're just going to enrich it until it drops again. Ding! Mixture set. That's it. That's as difficult as it is to set the mixture in this aircraft. And that's one of the things I really, really appreciate about sort of these old school planes is the fuel injected ones. They're very tough to set because they don't run rough on you because they're very, very smooth. You just get a power drop suddenly and it gets really frustrating to operate kind of a thing. One of the other things we have to put up with, and I remember this myself when I was first learning to fly with a sucker, is having to deal with the fact that now we have to change fuel tanks. And if you came from a 172, of course, this is a pain in the butt. But the way that you would do it is actually really, really quick. What you do is you come over to here, put the fuel pump on, you get a little pressure increase. You reach down and you go click, just like that, and then you flip fuel tanks. One of the things that we actually have on the GPS and the Archer that I fly is a little thing will pop up and say, switch fuel tanks, and you're like, okay, fine. So after we do that, of course, so we pop off the fuel pump, and you should now be on the other fuel tank. Our power is basically perfectly set. Now, navigation in this aircraft is a relatively straightforward experience. Let's see here. I'm trying to get my handy-dandy little heading set roughly right there, like that. But flip that on real quick. We're going to go ahead and press altitude hold there. I don't quite get why they did it that way, but that's okay. It doesn't really bother me too much. Again, I can use trim just like anybody else can. So a couple different tools we have. Of course, we have VOR, which is super relatively easy to use. All we would do is we come over to our navigation radio. We'd switch it over to the frequency we want to use. Everybody knows my favorite frequency in that regard. 114, 900. Of course, if I can get 900. And of course, one of the things that makes this plane a little goofy is the fact that you'd have to come over here now, and you'd have to actually set... You'd have to tell this instrument, because this is an HSI, which navigation you want to use. You actually have two of them down here. You have one switch for your navigation, and you also have a second switch on this particular aircraft that goes from navigation to GPS. Now, the GPS here, as you can tell, is a slightly different unit than some of the stuff that you wanted to do before, kind of a thing. If you go to nav, it shows you kind of that detail, and those new waypoint details. We'd have to actually come in here and program this. But one of the nice things is I've actually pressed power and home real quick. One of the things they added to us, which I'm really getting a kick out of, is we actually have a map now. And this is just kind of one of those things, and you can get a real good feel for just how amazingly off course I am right now. And again, our goal here was to fly up to, I love the fact I can't click and drag, but this is so cool. So unfortunately, this is not a sectional, which is kind of annoying for me because it's just sort of one of those things where I really wish short press home. I press short press. I like this. This thing's cool. But it's neat that we have OpenStreetMap built into my airplane now, because I certainly never had that on any of the planes that I flew, but that's perfectly fine, kind of a thing like that. So what we'll do, of course, is that we have our checklist, we have a topper says, we have a little settings, so we can actually mess with some of these things. I love how you can adjust the brightness now. It's like all these like little things, it's like, oh, this is so cool, kind of a thing. And of course, you have this one. If you wanted to, I could actually go into my sim brief and I could download everything, which is super duper cool and all that, but nothing I want to work. But what I wanted to concentrate on instead is switching my GPS to something a little more traditional here. I'm going to grab a GNS 530. And the reason I'm grabbing the GNS 530 is because what I would like to do here is I'd like to go ahead and lock on to my destination. But as you can see, the fun little bug that we had from before has made a fun little return. So I'm actually going to crank this up just a little bit, make my flow a little bit simpler. Ah, the bug returned. Thanks, Flight Sim. I make things very interesting for us. Go ahead and shut off my automatic pilot. I'm going to come over to the right just a little bit. And we're going to continue on making my way in the general direction of where I need to go. So one of the things, of course, that you have to remember with this particular plane is if you're flying the older version that has the directional gyro on it. So let me go ahead and flip that on real fast. This thing processes. And when I say processes, I mean every time you turn the plane, the thing loses 10 degrees. That's not that bad. But the reality is it does actually precess. And by that, I mean it'll actually slowly twist itself out of alignment here. Because again, this is a gyro in here. There's nothing magnetic about any of this. So what you would actually have to do as you're operating is every 10 to 15 minutes is you'd have to come down here and it basically fits with this in order to get it to work. The other thing, of course, we can do is because we're in flight sim is we can hit the D key. But the way you would actually have to adjust it is you'd have to look really carefully at this bouncing compass that you have right here. Then you come back over here and actually crank this thing to get it to the angle that you want it to be. Now, me as a kind of a junior pilot at the time, that was one heck of an experience to try to get all those things to work right. And I can't tell you how many times, I'd fly or whatever, and sure enough, surprise, you discover that, you've made a critical mistake with something that you were doing there. And of course, it gives you all sorts of problems with that. Or you forgot to check it, and next thing you know, you're like 4 degrees off course, and now you feel like you're going to get terribly lost, and the depression sets in, and you're just ready to quit flying and all that other kind of stuff. Not really, it's never that bad kind of a thing, but that's okay, kind of a deal. I see that the bug has returned. Not that I need it. I can fly perfectly fine without a GPS. So if you did want to fly VOR, which we're unfortunately going to get trapped doing here on account of the fact, I turned my fan on instead of my avionics, that's fine. What you could do, of course, is after dialing the frequency that you need, I'll go ahead and switch this back to the previous one. Boop, there we go. What you would have to do is you'd have to make sure you're in the navigational hold mode. And then, of course, after you do that, you'll notice because we don't have the HSI anymore, that our navigation for the VOR would actually be up here. So, for example, if I was to make my way over to Hartford, flip it all the other way. Wow. So the one thing that is super sensitive on this plane is that. It is not. The real way, by the way, is when you're cranking this thing, this needle is super duper loosey-goosey. So I can tell you right now that if I wanted to go directly towards Hartford, Connecticut, I would need to be on a heading of about 9 or 8 degrees. And the reason I know that is I can see I'm actually basically on the way to Hartford right now, which is... talk about flying without flying, kind of a thing like that. But basically what we would do at this point is we navigate back and forth with that. Now, if I didn't have that and instead I had the HSI, the nice thing with that now is I get my little lubber line. That is what it is called, by the way. Lubber is going to be this guy right here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip trip and get us a little bit closer to Wyndham. Ah, there it is. Now, the interesting thing here was during my basically shooting by the hip navigation here, I actually did a really nice job of not getting terribly lost in Connecticut. I guess it helps when this is the only place you ever fly. Looking directly off my nose, of course, there's lovely Wyndham, Connecticut, but I'm not sure what the weather's going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go check that real quick. I'm going to go pop over here, 13367, and we learned from before that you have to push it all the way up. A little different.
Kilo India Juliet Delta automated weather observation 13002. Wind calm. Visibility 10. Sky condition few clouds at 2,800 feet, 100 feet scattered. Temperature -7 Celsius. 2.10 Celsius. Altimeter tree 055.
All right. So what we do here, of course, we come in here and reset our altimeter, which has all been preset, ready to go. And now we got to get this plane down. Now, one of the cool things that they've actually done for us in Just Flight, which I think is cool, is they actually added a top of descent calculator. So what I can do is I can actually ask it to do that. So I can ask it to do that. Then I can ask it to actually dial in the altitude, which is 1247, in case you're curious. And it actually will tell me I need 500 feet per minute. Isn't that so cool? Which is good, because I'm just going to push the nose over. And we're going to get 500 feet per minute downwards. Now, one of the weird things about this plane, as I've said in many videos in the past, is just how tricky it is to actually get the plane back down. Now, with this particular plane, when I originally flew it, of course, my mind was the old school way where you pull the throttle back, put the carburetor heat on, just kind of stick the nose where it needs to be to get 500 feet per minute. But for this one, believe it or not, and this is one of the things I kind of enjoy, is you just push the nose down, wait for it to say 500 feet per minute, which is in the bottom right corner. Remember, it's a VSI, it's a very sticky instrument, and that's it. The only thing you really have to stress out about now is the fact that my mixture is completely going to be wrong once I cross under $5,000. And the other thing you're going to have to put up with is the fact, if you look on my left, my airspeed is slowly creeping towards VNO, which is the naughty speed. We're not supposed to be crossing that for a reason. Again, any sudden movements of controls could do some real damage. One of the fun things, of course, in the real world that we don't really get in the sim, which is kind of a shame, is all the wind in our ears. Now, I see that airport, and it's looking pretty groovy right now. But landing will be in our next video. Enjoy.